This is the story of a world without borders. A world where maps did not exist. Well, okay, that isn't exactly true. There were maps. They just looked different. They had monsters, mythical creatures, and in most cases, the Americas were missing. Welcome to my channel. And today we are going back before the world had borders, or maps, or names, for most of the things we now take for granted. We're going back to a time when knowing your way around the world required something more than Google Maps. It required instinct, knowledge of the stars, and a good memory. We'll follow the development of maps from their earliest forms, which date back thousands of years through ancient Greece, the Middle Ages up until the Age of Discovery, when explorers set out to chart new territories and document them on increasingly accurate maps. And yes, I know this is a history channel, not a geography channel, but if you've ever wondered how we went from this to this, then you're in the right place. Now let's go back to a time before cartography. Before continents were stitched together with coordinates and oceans got names other than that big salty water over there, humans moved through the world, guided not by charts, but by memory, myth, and stars. A rough understanding of their environment helped our ancestors survive. For example, Polynesian navigators memorized wave patterns, swells, and star routes, sailing for weeks across thousands of miles of ocean to reach uncharted islands. Knowing where not to walk was perhaps even more vital. For the Aboriginal Australians, who walked their ancestral lands for tens of thousands of years, geographer was part song, part story. They sang song lines that traced paths through deserts, each bend and landmark woven into an oral tradition passed down for generations. Native American tribes, such as the Hopi encoded land, features interwoven bead patterns, teaching girls the geography of canyons, mesas and mesas. Through textiles, these traditional maps were less about charting territory and more about tying people to place. Direction was learned through rhythm, intuition, experience. Not through latitude and longitude, but gradually, humans began to record what they observed. And here's a question for you. When do you think the first map was made? Was it 5,000 years ago? 10,000 years ago? 100,000 years ago? How about 7,000? Our winner is 7,000. During the Neolithic period around 7,000 BCE, people living in Anatolia etched rudimentary plans of village layouts onto stone. These may have served as building guides, but they were also among the earliest known examples of mapping, though what constitutes a map is debatable. By 2000 BCE, the Babylonians produced more detailed maps, usually inscribed on clay tablets. They showed rivers and cities from a vertical view, like a bird or a god looking down. They weren't just geographical, they were cosmological. Placing Earth at the center of divine order, the surrounding waters were often personified as deities. 2. Egyptian tombs held maps of the underworld. Rather than guiding merchants, these diagrams guided souls through the afterlife. But the first great civilizations weren't the first to chart their world. Across the Eurasian landmass, Chinese silk weavers created remarkable depictions of valleys and military routes as early as 200 BCE. These maps, usually no larger than a hand scroll, were astonishingly accurate, thanks to advances in surveying techniques. The purposes of these early maps varied. Some were sacred, some strategic, but they shared one thing in common: a human trait, the urge to make sense of the space around us. Over the centuries, many cultures developed their own methods of recording geographical information. For example, the ancient Greeks mapped the sky, while the Inca used knotted ropes to keep track of their history and account for land ownership. Each of these systems worked well within its own culture. But when it came to cross-cultural exchange, confusion reigned. Consider this Chinese map of Korea and Japan. Because the Chinese lacked a word for north, They indicated the direction with a turtle, which happened to face south. Consequently, they labeled Japan as lying to the east of Korea, when in fact it's to the east of China. By 500 BCE, Greek thinkers were creating geometry, and some applied those principles to geography. Philosophers realized Earth must be round, and one of them, Anaximander, drew the first known map of the known world. But it was still a map of mythology as much as geography. He placed the sun and moon in rings around Earth, explaining eclipses by imagining a circular shadow cast on the surface. Not exactly what we would call scientific, but still, he was trying to understand the world around him. Centuries later, Ptolemy, building on Greek and Mesopotamian models, wrote it introduced latitude and longitude and attempted to model the globe mathematically. He defined Earth's circumference and location of cities, outlining the entire known world from Britain to Ethiopia and beyond. For centuries, his work provided the backbone of European cartography. But Ptolemy was limited to Africa remained undersized, Asia ballooned eastward, and the Americas simply didn't exist on his parchment. The world was still a puzzle missing half its pieces. While Greek cartographers were busy charting the cosmos, the Jewish and Christian communities in the Eastern Mediterranean were engrossed in something else, spreading the word of their prophets. Naturally, they wanted to show where those prophets had lived. The result was the first Tur map. These maps placed Jerusalem at the center, flanked by Asia, Europe, and Africa. Scholars debate why the top was reserved for Asia and not, say, Africa. Perhaps it was because Muhammad was born in Mecca, which lay closer to the Mediterranean. Whatever the reason, east pointed upward. It wasn't for navigational ease, but spiritual orientation. These maps didn't aim to guide travelers, they guided faith. Geography bowed to doctrine. Meanwhile, Islamic scholars preserved and enhanced Greek cartography. Knowledge flowed between Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba. In the 12th century, the king of Sicily commissioned Oladrisi to create an impressive map of the known world. The project was a marvel. The final product, a huge circular map divided into 7 sections. Each ruled by a different heavenly body, was geologically and astronomically accurate. The map showed detailed regions from Spain to India. It was both a triumph of cartography and a testament to the spirit of Muslim scholarship, which prized observation and trade knowledge. Al-Idrisi sent copies to kings and caliphs, hoping they would promote commerce, and indeed, his map improved accuracy in the age of caravans. But as fascinating as these maps are, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, or rather, the 2 continents in the room, the Americas. Even in the 12th century, Europeans knew the North African coast quite well. Yet no one imagined a landmass so vast lay just across the sea. Likewise, while the Inca built a sophisticated road system spanning the Andes, they had no conception of a Pacific Ocean. Despite the existence of maps, the world remained stubbornly incomplete for thousands of years. Cartographers relied on travelers' accounts, which were often filtered through myth and legend. Marco Polo's tales of the Mongols included fantastical descriptions of China, though historians debate how much he actually saw. In the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Mehmed II ordered a map showing his far-flung domains, but it contained more wish than reality, including mythical creatures meant to ward off intruders. The strange omission of the Americas stemmed not from ignorance, but knowledge. People in the Old World knew there were lands beyond the sea, but they didn't know how to get there. In the 15th century, though, that changed. As we move from prehistory to recorded history, from myth to science, the world began to shrink. Printing arrived in Europe in the 1440s, and soon after portolan charts, nautical maps etched with compass roses and coastlines grew in demand. Sailors needed precision. Merchants needed trade routes. The age of exploration, sparked by curiosity and colonization, demanded better tools. Mapmaking became a craft of survival, profit, and conquest. Then came the news. There was land across the ocean, and that news changed everything. What would you put on a map if you could put anything on it? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To learn more about the history of maps, check out the resources in the description. And remember to subscribe for more historical tales from my channel. See you next time. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was star. When night fell over the known world, sailors would turn their eyes to the heavens, searching for signs above the waves. For centuries, they'd navigated by the stars, tracking constellations across the dark canvas of the sky. Now they needed those same celestial guides to help them explore uncharted waters and lead them safely home. Without modern compasses, sextants, or GPS, navigating the oceans depended on knowing exactly which stars to look for, how to read their positions, and then do the math to figure out where that might leave you. You needed to know your latitude and longitude, not just because it helped you keep track of where you are, but also because it allowed you to draw it on a map. So if you wanted to know what was on the other side of the world, or worse, make a map of what you'd seen on your travels, you needed to know the exact coordinates of everything. Hi everyone, this is Crash Course Geography, a study of maps and everything in them. Maps of latitude and longitude started appearing during the Age of Exploration, which we'll get to shortly. But for now, let us set our maps aside and talk about the age before that, when the stars themselves were the map. Before GPS, there were things like astrolabes, armillary spheres, quadrants, and These devices were used to measure angles, specifically the angle between the horizon and an object in the sky. If you knew that angle, you could use trigonometry to calculate your latitude. Latitude is the angular distance, north or south of the equator, measured from the center of the Earth and expressed in degrees. Because the Earth is a sphere, lines of latitude run east to west and encircle the Earth parallel to the equator. The equator is 0 degrees latitude and the North Pole is 90 degrees north. To find your longitude, which is the angular distance east or west of a reference line, you have to know what time it is somewhere else. For centuries, astronomers relied on sighting major stars. In medieval times, sailors would use a cross-staff, basically a stick with two equally long arms that had sights at the ends. Looking up at the night sky, sailors would find Polaris, the North Star, and use the cross-staff to measure the angle between the horizon and Polaris to determine their latitude. Once they knew their latitude, sailors would consult tables of astronomical positions to find out their longitude based on the positions of the stars. The problem was, there were some limitations to the accuracy of these tools, and it made navigation tricky. As one sailor wrote, "Many have been the deaths which have happened by going off the right course through trusting to the wrong reckoning." But then, in the early 15th century, two astronomers developed instruments that could calculate both latitude and longitude with greater accuracy. One of those instruments was the astrolabe, which looks kind of like a fancy protractor, and the other was the quadrant. The astrolabe could calculate latitude with greater precision, and the quadrant could measure the altitude of stars above the horizon. But these improvements weren't enough. Sailors still needed ways to navigate faster and more accurately, which led to an explosion of curiosity about the stars themselves. And that curiosity, combined with new technologies, ushered in an era of discovery. We call it the Age of Exploration, or for this episode, the Age of Wonder. Wonder is a powerful motivator. For centuries, merchants had scoured the earth for rare goods like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, traveling overland through shifting kingdoms and unpredictable terrain. Along the way, They heard stories from local merchants of even more wondrous things, like the gold of the Sun King Mansa Musa, or the fabulously wealthy city of Cath. But getting there was risky, so wonder fueled trade and desire, pushing explorers toward the unknown. By the late 1400s, Europe stood at the edge of a cartographic revolution. The printing press had begun to churn. Cities were swelling with merchants, and whispers of trade routes to far-off lands stirred ambition. Yet much of the globe was still terra incognita, unknown land. What people knew came from rumor, religion, and dreams. Asian silk, African gold, and Arab spices dazzled traders, but to reach them required perilous overland routes through shifting kingdoms and unpredictable terrain. Sea travel promised speed, but maps were incomplete, and stars could only tell so much. It was a time of marvel and myth when sea monsters guarded corners of the earth, and islands of perpetual youth teased sailors with whispers of immortality. So let's follow the seafarers and see what wonder can teach us about mapping the world. As the Renaissance dawned, a few intrepid Europeans set sail into the Atlantic. At first, they headed west in search of direct routes to Asia. But others recognized the practical value of learning more about their own coastline. These journeys yielded rich rewards, trading luxury goods for fish and timber. Then in the early 1400s, Portuguese ships hugged Africa's west coast. Mapping each inlet and cape, they named the southwestern tip of Africa the Cape of Good Hope, because they hoped it would lead to a sea route to India. Navigation was improved by the astrolabe sextant and innovations in ship design, namely the caravel, a small, nimble, and fast sailing ship. This was important because ships couldn't just sail forever without stopping for supplies, so the smaller, faster ships were better able to stay at sea longer. By 1488, Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias had rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving that a water route to India was possible. A decade later, Vasco da Gama reached Calicut, opening trade routes that would shift economic power to the coastlines. And by then, cartographers were scrambling to keep up. Each voyage brought new data, sketches, and first-hand stories. The map began to breathe, stretching with each sail. Meanwhile, across the sea, Christopher Columbus was plotting his own course, and he was driven less by science than by stubborn optimism. In 1492, with support from Spain, he sailed west in search of a shortcut to Asia. He was armed with flawed calculations that underestimated Earth's circumference and ignored a whole continent in his path. Instead, he reached the Caribbean. He met the people he called Indians and landed in the Bahamas. Though he never realized what he'd found, he sparked a tidal wave of European curiosity and colonization. Maps began to show islands where none had existed before. Cartographers scratched new coastlines into parchment. As for Columbus, after his first voyage, he returned to Europe a hero. But after his second and third voyage, in which he failed to find gold and made enemies of local rulers, he spent his last years in Spain under house arrest, swearing that he had reached India. Meanwhile, while Columbus struggled with denial, Florentine merchant Amerigo Vespucci embraced the truth. These were not Asia's outskirts. They were an entirely new landmass. Vespucci sailed along South America's coast between 1497 and 1504. His letters, widely published, described stars unseen in Europe, vast rivers and distinct cultures. He proposed that this was a new world, separate from the known continents. That phrase stuck, and with it, a new paradigm. Earth had more than 3 continents. Between 1500 and 1507, exploration accelerated. John Cabot sailed from England to Newfoundland. Pedro Alvarez Cabral reached Brazil. The Spanish combed the Caribbean. Each journey brought sailors, scribes, and sketchers. and word got around. Scholars and mapmakers eagerly devoured every scrap of news. German scholars and mapmakers caught wind of the news. In Saint-Dié, a small town nestled in Lorraine, the humanist circle known as the Gymnasium Vosagens compiled data from Vasapucci's letters, existing charts and Ptolemaic models. Among them was Martin Waldseemüller, an ambitious mapmaker and scholar who believed the Earth could be redrawn. He envisioned something unprecedented, a massive wall map, over 4 feet wide, showing the world as it now was, including the newly named America. We're going to pick up the story of how cartographers refined their craft next time, but in the meantime, you can learn more about what life was like for those setting sail in the age of exploration through additional resources. Many maps and borders represent modern geopolitical divisions that have often been decided without the consultation, permission, or recognition of the land's original inhabitants. Many geographical place names also don't reflect the indigenous or aboriginal people's languages. So we want to acknowledge these people's traditional and ongoing relationship with that land, and all the physical and human geographical elements of it. We encourage you to learn about the history of the place you call home, through resources like Native Land, CA, and by engaging with your local indigenous and aboriginal nations through the websites and resources they provide. Thanks for watching this episode, which was filmed at a studio and was made in partnership with a digital studio and nature. It was also made with the help of all these nice people. If you want to help keep this content free for everyone forever, you can join our community on a crowdfunding platform. You've probably heard the story before, how the Americas got their name from Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci, whose letters describing faraway lands inspired German cartographer Martin Waldseemüller to put pen to paper and christen a newly imagined continent in his honor. But there's more to the story, much more. Who was Martin Waldseemüller? Why did he name the Americas? And how did his small act of patronage change our understanding of the world forever? Join me as we head to early 16th century Europe to meet the man who gave America its name. Chapter 3. The Scholar Who Gave America Its Name. Part 1. Born into a Changing World. Martin Waldseemüller was born around 1470 in the town of Wolf, nestled in the region of Swabia within the Holy Roman Empire, now Germany. His early life unfolded as Europe emerged from medieval shadows into the sunlight of the Renaissance. Books multiplied, knowledge circulated, and the old map of reality, dominated by theology, was now being redrawn by reason, observation, and exploration. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a kid growing up in the Middle Ages. Your world is contained, your horizons limited. You hear tales of far-off lands and cultures, but they sound more like stories than realities. Then suddenly, everything changes. Explorers are returning with first-hand accounts and exotic goods from distant shores. The world expands. It's like going from black and white to color. This shift from medieval to Renaissance was a profound moment in history, and for young Martin, it would be a defining era of his life. Waldseemüller's education, both classic and cutting edge, reflected this moment. He studied at the University of Freiburg, absorbing mathematics, astronomy, theology, and classical literature. However, it was cartography, the art and science of making maps, that captured his imagination. At a time when the very nature of the world was being redefined, cartography was no longer just about drawing borders and labeling seas. It was about capturing the essence of a changing reality. It was during this period that the humanist movement gained momentum. Humanism was more than just a trend. It was a revolution in thinking. Humanists like Waldseemüller focused on classical texts, on the human experience, and on observation and reason. It was this fusion of old and new, of classical wisdom and modern discovery that would shape Waldseemüller's approach to cartography. Part 2, Saint-Dié and the Humanist Circle. In the early 1500s, Waldseemüller's path led him to a small town in northeastern France. Called Saint-Dié, this seemingly insignificant place would become a pivotal point in Waldseemüller's life and consequently in world history. Saint-Dié was far from a major city. It was tucked away in the Vosges Mountains and might easily have been overlooked, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in intellectual ambition. Here he met Ductu of Lorraine, a patron of the arts and sciences, who was keen on making Saint-Dié a hub of intellectual activity. Under the Duke's patronage, a group of scholars known as the Gymnasium Vosgiens thrived in Saint-Dié. This group was a melting pot of ideas. Members included poets, historians, scientists, and humanists, all united by a thirst for knowledge and a desire to push the boundaries of understanding. This circle of scholars, with Waldseemüller at its core, became a crucible of thought, where ideas were tested, debated, and refined. It was here that Waldseemüller connected with Matthias Ring, a Latinist and editor who would play a pivotal role in shaping Waldseemüller's magnum opus. Together, they delved into the burgeoning field of geography, poring over newly acquired maps and astronomical tables, trying to piece together the grand puzzle of the world. Part 3, Vespucci's Letters and the Birth of America. In 1499, a Florentine sailor named Amerigo Vespucci returned from a voyage to the Americas and wrote a letter to his friend, the famous scientist and polymath Leonardo da Pisa, also known as Fibonacci. Little did Vespucci know that this letter would spark a cartographic revolution. Vespucci described lands and stars previously unseen in Europe, and in the eyes of Waldseemüller and Ringman, Vespucci had gone farther south than any other explorer, possibly reaching Brazil and beyond. But it wasn't just the exotic locales that captivated them. It was the implications. They believed Vespucci had realized something monumental. He had discovered a new continent. Up until then, the prevailing belief was that the Earth was a giant sphere surrounded by water on all sides. There was simply no room for another landmass. But Vespucci's Thales changed that. The idea of a new continent was radical, challenging the very foundations of what was known. Yet this is exactly what caught the attention of Waldseemüller and Ringman. They saw in Vespucci's account not just adventure, but evidence of a world larger and more complex than they had ever imagined. Now comes the pivotal moment. Working with Ringman, Waldseemüller decided to translate Vespucci's letters from Italian to Latin. The letters were published under the title Mundus, and in this Latin version Vespucci's name was transformed to Vas. As they read through Vespucci's descriptions, a plan began to form in their minds. Why not create a map that incorporated these new discoveries? More than that, why not center this map on the Americas in Vespucius, the man they believed had discovered it? It was a daring idea, challenging long-held beliefs, and naming a new continent after a living person was no small matter. But Waldseemüller and Ringman were undeterred. With meticulous care, they set about creating a map that would change the world. Part 4. Waldseemüller's map-making brilliance. The year is 1507, and the place is Saint. In the modest scriptorium of the Gymnasium Vosgiens, a revolution is unfolding. Martin Waldseemüller and his team are putting the finishing touches on a masterpiece that will redefine the world. Their creation, the Universalist Cosmographia, is not just a map. It is a testament to human curiosity, courage, and the spirit of discovery. The map, which accompanied a booklet called Cosmographiae Introductio, laid out their vision and rationale. The main attraction was, of course, the centerpiece of the map, the depiction of the Americas. Labeled America, the map was a triumph of cartographic art. It showed newly sketched coastlines of South America, an accurate depiction of Africa's southern tip and a separate continent labeled America. Additionally, it introduced improved latitude, longitude, coordination, artistic flourishes like wind guards and compass roses, demonstrating both accuracy and aesthetic appeal. To put this achievement in context, imagine you're looking at a map for the first time that shows the United States, but it doesn't have Alaska or Hawaii. That's because those states were not yet discovered or annexed. Similarly, Waldseemüller's map depicted the known world of his time, leaving space for future discoveries. It was a bold statement of what was known and a tantalizing glimpse of what might be out there. Part 5. Later years and evolving perspectives. After publishing the groundbreaking 1507 map, Waldseemüller continued his work in cartography, refining and updating his maps as new discoveries were made. Interestingly, in later versions of his maps, he dropped the name America from South America, perhaps reconsidering Vespucci's role or responding to political pressure. Scholars still debate why. Was it modesty, reassessment, or response to criticism? Regardless, the 1507 map had already taken flight. Its influence spread across Europe. The impact of Waldseemüller's maps was profound. They helped shift cartography from theological symbolism to scientific realism. His work left an indelible mark on education, policy, and worldviews, influencing generations of explorers and scholars. And while the debate over who truly discovered the Americas continues, one thing is certain. Martin Waldseemüller's contribution to our understanding of the world is a legacy that continues to shape our world today. As we bring this episode to a close, think about the small ways you can make a big difference, just like Waldseemüller. Maybe it's sharing a fact you learned, appreciating someone's work, or keeping an open mind about new ideas. These small actions can have a ripple effect, much like Waldseemüller's map did for our understanding of the world. Who knows? You might just spark the next revolution in knowledge. And if you want to learn even more about the incredible journey of discovery that led to the birth of the Americas, check out the additional resources we've linked below. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering. After all, as the great Leonardo da Vinci once said, the greatest deception men suffer is from their own opinions. And sometimes the truth, like the shape of our world, is much bigger than we think. Thanks for joining us on this episode of our show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more amazing historical tales. We'll see you next time. Imagine being so intellectually curious that you assemble a team of scholars to produce the world's first true map of the Americas, one that gives the new world pride of place across from Asia and Africa, acknowledging not just Europe and the known regions of the Old World. Imagine further that your world map is also the first to bear the name America, thus christening the entire continent. If you are picturing a famous scientist or an explorer, then you have been sold a bill of goods. This cartographic coup wasn't the work of a singular genius, but rather the achievement of a group of friends. So to find out what happened, we must travel back in time to a small mountain town in France. Welcome to this series. Today we're heading to the quiet French town of Saint-Dié, where the mist-shrouded hills and dense forests conceal an extraordinary story. In the early 1500s, this unassuming place became a hub of intellectual ferment. It all started with a man named Duke Tow of Lorraine, who wasn't content with the political ambitions of his region. No, he dreamed of something bigger, something bolder. Now, Duke Renet may not be a name that echoes through history, but he was a patron of the arts, a humanist, and he wanted to transform Saint-Dié into a beacon of learning. He assembled a group of scholars, artists, linguists, astronomers, and mathematicians. And together they formed what would become known as the Gymnasium Vosagens. Why this name? Well, gymnasium refers to the Greek term for a place of exercise, both physical and mental. And Vosagens pays homage to the Latin term for the Vosges Mountains, the region where Saint-Dié was nestled. The gymnasium wasn't just a social club, though. It was a crucible of ideas, a place where classical wisdom met the latest reports from explorers and scientists. Its members weren't satisfied with the state of knowledge as it was. They wanted to push the boundaries of what was known about the world. Their debates likely echoed through the very streets of Saint-Dié, as they discussed everything from the ancient Greeks to the stars above. But their interests weren't confined to theory. They delved into the practicalities of life, too, arguing about how to farm better, how to treat illnesses, and how to make the world a better place. They dissected texts, debated theories, and drafted documents, laying the groundwork for many of the advancements that would shape our world. The spirit of inquiry was so strong that they even took on the church, challenging long-held religious beliefs and paving the way for the scientific revolution. You see, these men weren't content with accepting things as they were. They questioned, they explored, and they dared to challenge the status quo. And their impact was for each. Their work laid the foundation for future scientific breakthroughs, influencing some of the greatest minds that came after them. In essence, the Gymnasium Vosagens was a cradle of enlightenment, a testament to the power of human curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge. It was here, in this unlikely corner of 16th century France, that the seeds of modern thought were sown. But the members of the gymnasium didn't just gather in cozy rooms discussing esoteric ideas. They tackled real-world problems with real-world solutions. They delved into subjects like agriculture, health, and governance, offering practical advice that resonated with people in their everyday lives. For instance, they might have discussed new farming techniques that could help feed the growing population or debate the best ways to treat illnesses plaguing the region. They might have even talked about how to improve the governance of their small corner of France, laying the groundwork for more democratic and citizen-focused rule. These weren't topics typically associated with scholars of the time, who were often seen as removed from the concerns of ordinary people. But the members of the gymnasium saw value in bridging the gap between theory and practice. They believed that knowledge wasn't confined to dusty books and ivory towers, but should be applied to make life better for everyone. This practical approach wasn't just a quirk of the gymnasium, it was deeply rooted in their philosophy. They saw the world as something to be understood and improved, not just accepted as it was. This mindset was a stark contrast to the prevailing attitudes of the time, and it helped pave the way for modern scientific thought. By applying their knowledge to real-world issues, the members of the gymnasium showed that learning wasn't just about acquiring facts, but about improving lives and shaping the world. So what did they accomplish in this area? Well, they achieved quite a bit. They might have helped develop new agricultural methods that increased food production, or they may have assisted in establishing public health initiatives to combat diseases. Their work could have even influenced political reforms that made the government more responsive to the needs of the people. While specific examples may be lost to history, the impact of their practical problem-solving shouldn't be overlooked. The members of the gymnasium didn't just theorize. They took action, they put their knowledge to work to make a tangible difference in their world. And that legacy continues to inspire us today. Now, amidst this intellectual fervor, there were whispers carried by merchants and missionaries, tales of distant lands and a new route to Asia. Enter Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian explorer whose letters spoke of a vast and uncharted wilderness. Could this be the eastern edge of Asia, a landmass stretching further than anyone had imagined? Or was it something else entirely? A new world that challenged the very notion of where the Earth ended and what it meant for humanity's understanding of the globe. Now, you might wonder, why does the story of the Americas start with a bunch of French intellectuals? After all, you probably learned about famous explorers, right? Well, the truth is more fascinating than you might think. The men at the gymnasium weren't famous explorers or adventurers, but their thirst for knowledge rivaled any of those legendary figures. So let me introduce you to Martin Waldseemüller, the man who brought Vespucci's letters to the attention of the gymnasium. You see, Waldseemüller was a cartographer and a man possessed by a grand vision. He wanted to create a map that would encapsulate the world as it was, incorporating the latest discoveries and the wisdom of ancient geographers. It was a bold idea at the time, but Waldseemüller was undeterred. He gathered the works of ancient scholars, pored over Vespucci's writings, and combined this knowledge with the latest navigational data. His aim was nothing short of revolutionizing the way people saw the world. And let's not forget Matthias Ringman, a brilliant Latinist who translated Vespucci's letters and helped the gymnasium appreciate the significance of the explorer's claims. Then there's Jean Bassin de Sendac, a scholar who collected and organized geographic texts, providing the raw materials for the intellectual feast that took place at the gymnasium. All of these men played pivotal roles in bringing Vespucci's stories to the forefront, sparking the debates and discussions that would change the course of geographical history. Their patron, Duke II, also deserves recognition. Without his support, the work of the gymnasium would have floundered. It was his patronage that allowed the scholars to pursue their intellectual whims and gave them the freedom to challenge conventional wisdom. So no, the story of the Americas isn't about a single famous explorer. It's about a group of thinkers who dared to dream of a world without borders, who embraced diversity and sought to understand the intricacies of our planet. It is a story that reminds us of the power of collective thought and the brilliance that can emerge when minds come together to explore the unknown. The Gymnasium Vossagents wasn't just a group of scholars. It was a crucible of ideas, a place where the boundaries of human knowledge were pushed and where the concept of America was born. In the heart of Saint-Dié, these men didn't just discuss the world, they changed it. They ushered in a new era of scientific cartography, forever altering our perception of the globe. They produced the world's first map to depict the Americas in their proper place opposite Europe, Asia, and Africa. And they gave the continents their now ubiquitous name. As we gaze at any modern globe, we owe a debt of gratitude to these men. Their pioneering work laid the foundation for our current understanding of the world. So next time you hold a globe in your hands, remember the men of the Gymnasium Vossagents, the cartographers, the scholars, and the dreamers who unveiled the secrets of our planet and named it America. What do you think? Who deserves to be on this list and who doesn't? Let me know in the comments below. Welcome to my channel. In 2024, we're celebrating 150 years of the National Park Service. So join us this year as we explore America's special places and the stories they tell about our shared heritage. Chapter 5. Naming the New World. How America was chosen and why Columbus wasn't. By the early 1500s, the idea that the recently discovered lands were distinct from Asia had begun to take hold among European scholars. Maps, books, and reports flowed into university libraries and noble court, and yet these territories had no agreed-upon name. Old world maps referred to them as India or West Indies, anchored to Columbus's belief that he'd reached the outskirts of Asia. Others used vague terms like terra incognita. Cartographers sketched islands shaped like dragons, speculative coastlines, and marginal sea. The world was expanding, but language hadn't caught up. Enter Martin Waldseemüller and the scholars of the Gymnasium In the 16th century, intellectual life in Europe was centered around local courts and guilds. These weren't necessarily unified institutions, but loose networks of humanists, cartographers, scholars, and scientists loosely associated around prominent patrons. They discussed manuscripts, commissioned works, and built connections across borders. One such group formed in the 1500s around the court of an Austrian duke, known as the Gymnasium Vosagens, or Society of the New Learning. Its members included the cartographer and cosmographer Sebastian Munster, the astronomer and mathematician Johann Stoffler, and the classics scholar and humanist Matthias. All three would contribute to the burgeoning field of geography and its understanding of a transformed world. The key catalyst for their work was a pamphlet, a single sheet of paper that would forever alter the course of world history. In 1504, while serving as a pilot on a Spanish and Portuguese voyage off the coast of South America, Amerigo Vespucci witnessed something peculiar. He saw constellations of stars not visible from Europe. With careful observation, he noticed signs of a vast river flowing through the continent and encountered cultures unknown in the Old World. When he returned home, Vespucci wrote about these experiences in letters, which were then published in pamphlet form under the title Mundus. The text argued that the lands he'd explored were not Asia, nor the edge of India, but a separate continent. It presented New World maps that documented Vespucci's voyages and charted the shape of the South American coast. And so, as Europe grappled with understanding this fourth part of the world, Vespucci's writings provided an essential piece of the puzzle. Scholars could debate the accuracy of his accounts, but his perspective opened up possibilities. What if the Earth were bigger than anyone thought? What if the ancient Greeks hadn't seen everything there was to see? What if new regions and peoples remained unknown in the heart of the Western Hemisphere? His work inspired some of the most ambitious geographical scholarship since Ptolemy. The pamphlet immediately captured the interest of the Gymnasium. Martin Waldseemüller, a respected cosmographer and member of the group, recognized the significance of Vespucci's claims. He set to work translating and editing Vespucci's letters and reports, preparing them for publication. Working alongside him was Matthias, a Latin scholar whose precise knowledge of ancient languages would help authenticate Vespucci's text. In 1506, the scholars of the Gymnasium Vosagens gathered at a summer meeting near Vienna. There, Vespucci's account of a fourth part of the world was presented to the group. The discussions that ensued have become legendary. As Vespucci spoke, Ringman listened intently, taking notes on every word. According to legend, after the meeting, while walking along the Danube River, Ringman exclaimed, "Why haven't we called the country after Vespucci? In Latin," he continued, "let us call this part America, in honor of the wise and clever man America." This decision was a pivotal moment in history. As scholars began to accept the reality of a fourth continent, someone had to name it. And in that moment of inspiration, the world was changed forever. After the meeting, Ringman and Waldseemüller got to work. Using Vespucci's own Latinized name, America's Vespucci's, they created the feminine form, America. They published this new rendering in Cosmographiae Introductio, a book intended to teach the public about the newly christened continent. Accompanying the text was a map of the world. On it, Waldseemüller boldly inscribed the name America across the southern continent. This marked the first time that the name appeared on a map. From here, the concept spread quickly, appearing in books, broadsides, and eventually on globes. Ringman and Waldseemüller were not only the first to propose the name, but to show it on a map as well. But their decision went beyond mere cartography. By associating the unknown continent with the renowned explorer Amerigo Vespucci, they anchored the concept of a new world to a real person, giving it a sense of authenticity. Now, why didn't they choose Columbus? While it may seem odd to us today, given Columbus's fame, at the time, Vespucci was better known and more respected in academic circles. There are several reasons why the Gymnasium Vasagians chose Vespucci over Columbus. First, Vespucci's accounts of the New World had been more widely published and accessible than Columbus's. Second, the interpretation of what constituted discovery played a role. Vespucci argued for the novelty of the lands he'd seen, presenting them as a new world. Columbus, however, clung to the belief that he'd reached the outskirts of Asia. And finally, the humanist scholars valued intellectual pursuit over grand adventure. They saw in Vespucci a fellow scholar, someone who had observed and written about a new part of the world, while Columbus represented an explorer, an adventurer, a man of action rather than ideas. It is also important to remember that the decision to name the continent after Vespucci was unpersonal slight against Columbus. It simply reflects the fact that at the time Vespucci was considered to be the foremost authority on the New World. His writings were more widely available, and his theories were more widely accepted among scholars. The choice of name was based on intellectual considerations, not a deliberate attempt to diminish Columbus's contributions. Interestingly, the idea of calling the continent America was actually suggested by one of Vespucci's fellow explorers. In a letter to King Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, Amerigo Vespucci mentioned that his companion on the voyage, a Spaniard named Bobadilla, had remarked that the lands they had discovered should be named after Vespucci. While the king and queen did not respond to the suggestion, it would later be taken up by German scholars. Over time, the name stuck. By mid-century, America started appearing in other maps and texts. In 1569, it appeared on Mercator's famous world map, solidifying its place in cartographic history. Eventually, the name extended to North America as well, even though Vespucci likely never traveled that far north. In conclusion, the naming of America is a fascinating example of how exploration and scholarship go hand in hand. The discovery of a new continent sparked a wave of curiosity and debate among European scholars, leading them to reevaluate existing theories and propose new ones. In the end, it was Amerigo Vespucci whose name was chosen to represent this exciting new frontier. His detailed accounts of his voyages and his belief that the Americas were a separate continent rather than part of Asia helped to shape our understanding of the world. The decision to name the continent after Vespucci was a testament to the importance of scholarship and intellectual pursuits in the age of exploration. The humanist scholars of the 16th century recognized Vespucci's contributions to geography and science, and wanted to honor him for his achievements. In doing so, they gave us a name that has lasted over 500 years. So the next time you hear someone say, America, land of opportunity, or America, home of the brave, take a moment to appreciate the rich history and cultural significance of the name. Remember the explorers and scholars who shaped our understanding of the world and gave us a place to call home. By the year 1500, Europeans had mapped the globe as best they could. They knew the Earth was round, not flat, and they'd charted coasts, climates, and even some curious natives. But something was missing. Explorers like Amerigo Vespucci and Ferdinand Magellan were pushing ever further, and their discoveries needed somewhere to go, somewhere to be seen. Enter the mapmaker. And by mapmaker, I mean cartographers, astronomers, theologians, engineers, scientists, historians, and artists. For making a map was more than a job, it was an event. Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host. This is Chapter 6 of our Crash Course series, The Art of the Map. Today, we're re-looking at how Martin Waldseemüller and his team created one of the first modern world maps, the 1507 masterpiece, Universalis. This map shows the world as it was known in the late 15th century. when European cartographers were just starting to understand the true shape of the continents and the globe itself. It was also the first map to include the Americas as part of the world, separate from Asia, and the first map to use the name America. But while it looks old-fashioned by modern standards, this 16th century map was actually very advanced for its time. So let's see how it was made. First off, maps are kind of like artworks. They're made to be admired and appreciated, not just for function or convenience. This map took 3 years to make and cost hundreds of gold florins, which is why it was hung up in fancy places like universities and palaces. And since so few people could afford to own one, map makers didn't just focus on what to put on the map, but also how to make it look beautiful. That meant hand-carving detail plates, rolling ink, getting the edges perfectly aligned, designing the smooth curve of coasts and the jagged peaks of mountains. None of these things were done by machine, so mistakes were costly. If you sliced too deeply or smudged the ink, you might need to carve again or start a whole new plate. Precision wasn't just desired, it was sacred. Putting a map together was like assembling a giant jigsaw puzzle, except instead of cardboard pieces, there were wood blocks. This map was made in 12 sheets. That's a lot of puzzles. Not only did the pieces need to fit together, but each piece showed about half a continent and had to line up with the other pieces to show the whole picture. Then once printed, those pieces would need to be colored, which took even more precision. So it's easy to see why map making was considered an elite craft. It took years to master, and even experienced craftsmen could ruin a batch of prints in an instant. You might think of it as carpentry meets fine art, with a little bit of graphic design thrown in. So now that we know how much work went into making the map, let's talk about what it actually looked like. The map's title, Universalis Cosmographia, means universal description of the Earth, and the map certainly lived up to that name. It was a Mercator-style projection, meaning that lines of latitude and longitude intersected at right angles and gave straight lines to the major continents. Later, projections like Mercators are all about showing the world from a particular point of view. In this case, showing the best route for sailors between 2 points. But Mercator wouldn't publish his world map until 1569. So it turns out, Waldseemüller invented the Mercator map before Mercator did. Cool. But back to the 1507 map. It provided a view of the entire world, including both the northern and southern hemispheres, which was actually quite rare at the time. You can see the outlines of the continents and oceans pretty clearly, and if you zoom in, you can see lots of details. For example, you can see the islands and peninsulas of southern Africa and the newly discovered South America. You can see labeled oceans, mountain chains like the Himalayas, and even speculative land bridges connecting Asia and the Americas. You can also see the important cities and countries of Europe. For example, here's Rome and the Holy Land in the Mediterranean Sea, Jerusalem right there in the center, and here's Paris and London over here in Western Europe. And speaking of labeling, this map came with a lot of text. There were a couple reasons for this. First, maps were also kind of like textbooks, used to teach people about geography and the world around them. And second, not everyone who used this map spoke Latin. So there were some labels translated into different languages. For example, some of the Asian place names are written in Arabic characters. Overall, the map was designed to help people navigate and explore the world. But it also functioned as a kind of textbook, a way of organizing knowledge about the world. When we look at the map today, we can see how it reflects what was known about the world in the late 15th century. For example, the Americas are still labeled as India, and Europe and Asia were still thought to be connected in the far north. But we can also see how the map helped to shape our understanding of the world. For example, this was the first map to use the name America. The word America actually comes from the Italian word Arma, which was the nickname of the explorer Amerigo Vespucci, who had sailed to South America, and this map was the first one to show South America as its own continent separate from Asia. The map was also quite decorative. Look at the wind heads blowing from the corners, for example. These were meant to evoke classical ideas about the heavens and the winds, and then there are the ships sailing the oceans, which signified trade, exploration, and conquest. But the map wasn't just about the image itself. It was also about the message. By showing the world in this way, Waldseemüller and his team were saying something about the nature of geography and exploration. They were arguing that exploration demanded visualization, and that the world was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. Now, while the map was made up of 12 individual sheets, it was sold as a single item with a manual called Cosmography. This explained how to read the map and came with instructions for how to hang it on the wall and even how to make your own colored versions of the map. In fact, the manual is where the term America first appeared, replacing the medieval idea of a single giant landmass called terra incognita. It was a bold move, naming an unknown land after a living person. But it stuck, and eventually the name stuck too. In the end, the map wasn't just informative, it was persuasive. It told a story about the relationship between Europe and the rest of the world. And it helped to set the stage for the age of exploration and colonization. Sadly though, we do want to have a lot of examples of the original map, because most of the copies are black and white. The original may have been colored with black ink for the outline, red for highlights, and blue for ocean features, and we know that some owners colored their own copies by hand. So there are some examples of how the map might have looked in color, but without any surviving examples of the original, we don't really know. We do know, though, that some special library or palace editions may have had gilded embellishments on the borders. Maps were never just about finding your way from here to there. They were always about showing the world as we understood it, and sometimes trying to understand how we might change it. Making a map was a careful balancing act, weighing accuracy against legibility, utility against aesthetics. It required skill, patience, creativity, and daring. It was almost an art form, and in many ways it was. Thanks for watching this episode, which was filmed at a studio and made in partnership with a digital studio in nature. You want to help keep this content free for everyone forever? You can join our community on a crowdfunding platform. Martin Waldseemüller didn't sail ships, scale cliffs, or sketch harbors from direct experience. Instead, he created one of the most consequential maps in history by assembling evidence from others, stitching together descriptions, reports, and perspectives into a grand depiction of the world. As we delve into this episode, remember that our own understanding of the world is often shaped by the stories we hear, the data we gather, and the connections we make. Waldseemüller's approach, a precursor to modern cartography, teaches us about the power of synthesis, the value of diverse perspectives, and the courage to fill the unknown with informed guesses, rather than leaving it empty. Our story begins in the bustling town of Saint-Dié, in the heart of France. Here, nestled amidst rolling hills and whispering forests, was the Gymnasium, a school founded in 1499 by a man named John and his wife Elizabeth. It was here in 1507 that a young cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller embarked on a project that would change the world. Armed with a quill pen and fueled by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, he delved into the vast ocean of geographical discoveries, aiming to create a map that captured the latest findings of intrepid explorers. But where did this ambitious young cartographer find his treasure trove of geographical insights? He didn't set sail across the oceans or trek through uncharted territories. His power lay in his ability to collect, analyze, and synthesize information from a variety of sources. One invaluable resource for Waldseemüller were the voyage letters and logbooks of intrepid explorers, among them the accounts of Amerigo Vespucci and Pedro Alvarez Cabral held particular importance through their words. He learned of the dramatic contours of South America's eastern coast, the alluring hints of distant lands, and the vastness of the ocean expanse that lay before them. Another critical source was Portalin charts, nautical maps renowned for their accuracy. These charts meticulously documented coastlines and compass bearings, offering a detailed glimpse into the world as seen through the eyes of sailors. Waldseemüller pored over these charts, absorbing their detailed depictions of the known world and the whispers they carried of unexplored regions. In addition to these first-hand accounts, Waldseemüller turned to ancient texts for insights. One such work was Ptolemy's, a 2nd century text recently rediscovered and translated into Latin. This ancient guide, though outdated in many aspects, provided a framework for understanding the world that had endured for centuries. Furthermore, celestial navigation tables played a crucial role in Waldseemüller's research. These tables enabled sailors to estimate their latitude by measuring stars or the sun's position, providing valuable clues about the location of these newly discovered lands. Yet another source was rumors and merchant reports, though often vague, hinted at the existence of landmasses and exotic cultures, sparking Waldseemüller's curiosity and guiding his pen across the map. It's important to note that these sources varied wildly in precision. Some offered careful measurements, detailed illustrations, or first-hand observations. Others delivered tantalizing myths, conjecture, or poetic guesses. Waldseemüller, a trained mathematician, navigated these varied sources with a blend of skepticism and imagination. Now let us talk about what was known for certain by 1507. The coastlines of Western Africa were fairly well charted by Portuguese sailors who had ventured into the region in search of trade routes to Asia. Their efforts had unveiled the Atlantic coast of Africa, revealing its significant features and providing a solid foundation for Waldseemüller's map. Southern Europe and Mediterranean features were also well known, thanks to centuries of trade and exploration. This extensive body of knowledge allowed Waldseemüller to accurately depict these areas, ensuring that the familiar landmarks and coastlines of the Mediterranean were faithfully represented. With regard to South America, the general shape of its eastern coast, particularly Brazil, was known. Although no European had circumnavigated the continent, enough explorers had sailed along its northeastern and northern coasts to establish the major bays and headlands. This information was largely based on the accounts of Pedro Alvarez Cabral, who claimed to have sighted the coast of Brazil in 1500, and the subsequent explorations along the region regarding the northern Atlantic islands, the positions of the Azores, Canaries, and the Caribbean island clusters were reasonably well established. Navigational instruments, like the astrolabe and quadrant, were increasingly reliable, enabling sailors to estimate their latitude at sea. This technological advancement provided valuable data for cartographers, allowing for more precise placement of these islands. However, despite these known elements, much of the world remained shrouded in mystery and speculation. Uncharted coastlines, vast stretches of the Atlantic Ocean, and the unknown interiors of newly discovered continents presented a tantalizing puzzle. Let's now explore what was speculative, what he put forward that wasn't quite certain. Despite its ambition, Waldseemüller's map included features based on incomplete data or imagination. Firstly, the depiction of a large southern continent known as Terra Australis. This vast landmass, often depicted as a counterpart to Asia, Africa, and Europe, was believed to exist but remained undiscovered. Waldseemüller incorporated this speculative continent into his map, balancing it against the newly discovered lands in the northern hemisphere. Secondly, the concept of a separate America detached from Asia was revolutionary but speculative. This idea, not widely accepted at the time, challenged the prevailing view of a single, interconnected world. Waldseemüller's decision to include a distinct American landmass, though debated, reflected his open-minded approach to new discoveries. Regarding uncharted coastlines and interior regions, Waldseemüller often sketched them with generic curves, or left them as blank spaces, acknowledging the gaps in knowledge and inviting further exploration. For instance, the interior of South America was largely unknown. Rivers were added to show there must be some water, maybe somewhere. Lastly, Waldseemüller included an imagined Western Ocean beyond America, reminiscent of Ptolemaic ideas of a perfectly symmetrical world. This feature, though speculative, highlighted the prevailing desire for order and balance in geographical understanding. You might wonder why he didn't shrink from depicting what he didn't know, what he only imagined. Well, Waldseemüller's approach was rooted in the belief that knowledge could and should evolve. He recognized the limitations of the data available while remaining open to the possibility of new discoveries. Rather than leaving blank spots or adhering strictly to outdated maps, he filled in the gaps with informed guesses. He understood that these speculations could be revised as exploration revealed more about the world. This approach allowed him to craft a map that was not only a reflection of current knowledge, but also a catalyst for future discoveries. By presenting a dynamic and evolving view of the world, Waldseemüller's map served as a tool for those who ventured forth to explore and confirm or refine what was known. Now, it's important to acknowledge that while Waldseemüller's approach was groundbreaking, it wasn't without its critics. Many scholars clung to Ptolemy's traditional view of the world, finding comfort in the familiar rather than embracing the uncertainties of the unknown. They questioned his depiction of a separate American landmass and the inclusion of Terra Australis, viewing them as unnecessary speculation. However, Waldseemüller stood firm in his convictions, driven by his belief in the power of knowledge and the need to reflect the latest discoveries on his maps. He saw the world as dynamic and ever-evolving, and he refused to let outdated ideas confine his understanding. Despite the controversy, Waldseemüller's courage paid off. His map quickly gained recognition for its accuracy and completeness, becoming an essential tool for explorers and scholars alike. Let's now shift our focus to the inevitable mistakes that persisted on Waldseemüller's map. Even with all his care and precision, let's unpack them. Firstly, South America's size was often exaggerated, frequently shown more massive than it truly is. This misrepresentation stemmed from older measurements and the lack of precise data on the continent's extent. Secondly, distortions between Africa and Asia's proportions existed, again, influenced by older measurements and the limited understanding of the true scale of these vast continents. Regarding unexplored interiors, these regions were often shown as smooth voids or filled with mythical creatures and landscapes. This practice mirrored the Ptolemaic tradition of depicting unknown areas with blank spaces or symbolic features. Lastly, distances were not always accurate, partly due to the poor understanding of longitudinal measurements. This lack of precision led to some areas being stretched or compressed, distorting the map's overall accuracy. It's important to note that these mistakes, while significant, were not failures. They were stepping stones on the path to a more accurate understanding of the world. Each miscalculation paved the way for later cartographers, who could use better data, tools, and first-hand expeditions to refine and correct these earlier depictions. As we conclude our exploration of Waldseemüller's masterpiece, let's shift our focus to the man himself. Born in 1480 in a small village, Near Saint-Dié, Waldseemüller's passion for geography and cartography emerged early on. Inspired by the works of renowned cartographers and fueled by his own insatiable curiosity, he dedicated his life to unraveling the mysteries of the world. Though he might not have been the first to set foot on the lands he mapped, he was the first to present them to the world as a whole. So why does the story of this extraordinary map matter to us today? Because it reminds us of the power of synthesis, the value of diverse perspectives, and the courage to embrace the unknown. In an age of information abundance, we often face the challenge of sifting through vast amounts of data to find meaningful insights. Martin Waldseemüller offers a powerful lesson in navigating this complexity by drawing upon a wide range of sources, synthesizing diverse perspectives, and embracing calculated risks. Moreover, the story of the map encourages us to approach the unknown not with fear, but with curiosity and a willingness to speculate. Just as Martin Waldseemüller filled in the blanks with informed guesses, we too can navigate uncertainty by seeking patterns, extrapolating from available data and imagining possible scenarios. Of course, such speculation should be tempered with caution, recognizing the limits of our knowledge and the potential for error. Finally, Waldseemüller's legacy serves as a reminder to question conventional wisdom and challenge outdated ideas. Just as he dared to depict a world that defied Ptolemaic norms, we too should be willing to question long-held beliefs and explore new possibilities. As we continue our journey through history, let us embrace the spirit of curiosity, synthesis, and bold imagination that defined the remarkable tale of Martin Waldseemüller and his groundbreaking map. In 1507, Martin Waldseemüller, a French cartographer, did something crazy. He took a leap of faith, staked his reputation, and changed the way we see the world. He named a continent America, but then he kinda disappeared. His groundbreaking map went out of style, lost favor with the church, and was almost completely forgotten for 400 years. Yet without his controversial chart, our concept of America might never have taken shape. This is the map that named America and how it vanished into shadows and rose again. Chapter 8. Reception. When Martin Waldseemüller published the Universalis Cosmographia in 1507, he produced around 1,000 copies, a staggering number for the era. These were not mass-market posters, but scholarly tools. Large-format woodcut wall maps accompanied by the Cosmographia, a booklet that unpacked its meaning and methodology. Recipients included universities and scholarly circles in Germany, France, and Italy. Nobles, bishops, and cartography patrons like Jakob von who commissioned the map. Astronomers and astrologers interested in planetary geography. Merchants and navigators keen on emerging trade routes. So the map circulated widely. But despite this initial burst, the map faded from popular view. By the mid-16th century, newer charts more precise and politically aligned took. Gerardus Mercator's 1569 projection, for example, became the standard for navigation. Waldseemüller's bold geographic experiment was seen as speculative, outdated, and eventually forgotten. And here's why. First, changing scientific paradigms. As techniques for measuring longitude improved, Waldseemüller's placements, based on Vespucci's accounts, which had some errors, looked increasingly crude. Second, political as national powers began promoting their own explorers and settlements. Columbus, Cabral, Cartier, Vespucci's legacy was sidelined. The Portuguese, for example, funded and commissioned many early maps that emphasized their growing empire, often leaving little room for unclaimed lands that might challenge their authority. Third, religious sensitivities. The Reformation and Counter-Reformation shook trust in secular scholarship. And fourth, cartographic competition. Newer maps boasted cleaner lines, more current data, and were often smaller and cheaper to reproduce. For example, Sebastian Munster S. 1544. Cosmography included a detailed map of the Americas based on newer accounts and updated data. By the late 1600s, Waldseemüller's map was nearly forgotten. Only mentions in bibliographies and brief academic nods kept its legacy flickering. Then, in 1901, nearly 400 years after its creation, a unique, complete copy of the 1507 map surfaced in the library of Prince von Muhlberg-Wolfig in southwestern Germany, bound among other manuscripts. It had evaded detection, its 12 panels still intact, and its woodcut design remarkably preserved. Its rediscovery stunned historians and cartographers. Here was the first documented use of America on a map. It showed the continent as distinct from Asia, rendering Waldseemüller not just a cartographer, but a prophet of geographic reality. After intense negotiations, the U.S. Library of Congress acquired the map in 2003, paying $10 million, one of the highest prices ever for a historical document. It was placed in a climate-controlled chamber, meticulously conserved and digitized at high resolution for research. Its symbolic importance led to its display near the Declaration of Independence and Constitution in the exhibition, The Making of a Nation. Here are some of the ways it's echoed through history. First, global recognition. Held in one of the world's premier institutions, it became a touchstone for scholars across disciplines, languages, and countries. Exhibitions like The World in Maps at the British Library in 2015 included high-resolution scans and contextualized the map's impact. Second, transfer to new media. Digital technology allowed the Library of Congress to disseminate high-quality images and information about the map to a wide audience beyond Washington, D.C. Their website provides Zoom features, image downloads, and scholarly articles. Third, continued analysis. Historians and geographers built on the work begun in 1901, uncovering new details in the map's design, content, and reception, placing it in broader intellectual, artistic, and political trends. So how do we interpret Waldseemüller's legacy today? Some say he was simply a product of his time, a scholar building on existing knowledge and trends. Others argue that his approach and findings were genuinely groundbreaking, even if they weren't immediately recognized. We can also consider the reception of his map and its evolving interpretations over time. Initially praised by some and criticized by others, it eventually faded from view. Then its rediscovery sparked renewed interest and debate. The map's journey mirrors broader shifts in our understanding of exploration, colonialism, and naming. As we conclude our exploration of the 1507 map and its impact, let's reflect on the enduring questions it raises. Was the Americas truly a new continent, or just a different perspective on Asia? Did Amerigo Vespucci really sail to South America? And how did Waldseemüller reconcile conflicting accounts and data? These questions highlight the complexity of historical narratives and the challenges of certainty. They remind us that history is not just about finding answers, but about grappling with ambiguity, uncertainty, and competing perspectives. They encourage us to embrace the messiness and complexity of the past, and to appreciate the insights that emerge from wrestling with these complexities. Waldseemüller's 1507 map serves as a potent symbol of the human desire to explore, understand, and name the world around us. It reflects the intellectual curiosity, adventurous spirit, and boundless imagination that have driven humanity's quest for knowledge and discovery. The map's lasting impact on our understanding of geography, exploration, and colonialism is a testament to the power of human curiosity and the profound influence of individual minds on our collective perception of the world. Today, we live in an age where maps are digital, dynamic, and hype, but the Waldseemüller map reminds us that behind every chart is a choice of who to honor, how to see, what to guess and when to name. America, as a concept, began not on a battlefield or palace floor but in a quiet French town among thinkers who stared at stars, read Latin pamphlets, imagined a world larger than themselves. The story of the 1507 map is a reminder to remain open-minded, to question assumptions, and to recognize the complexity of our world. It encourages us to appreciate the contributions of those who came before us, while acknowledging the biases and limitations of their work. By understanding the context, intentions, and impact of historical sources, like the 1507 map, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the richness and complexity of the past. In a world where information is abundant, critical thinking is essential. The 1507 map invites us to become active participants in the creation of knowledge, to challenge conventional narratives, and to forge our own path to understanding. It calls on us to embrace uncertainty, to revel in ambiguity, and to find beauty in the tapestry of human experience. As we continue to explore the world around us, may we be inspired by the curiosity, courage, and creativity of those who dared to dream of new horizons. May we strive to understand the complexities of our shared history and to honor the contributions of all who have shaped our world. And may we always remember that behind every map is a story waiting to be discovered. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time and space. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts and feedback. Together, we can keep the spirit of exploration and discovery alive. Keep asking questions, keep seeking answers, and keep exploring the world around you. Who knows what wonders you might uncover? When we think of maps today, we usually picture something precise, something that lets us catch an entire continent or country in a single glance. But this wasn't always the case. Old maps are often prized for their illustrations, for their depiction of long-lost trading routes or mythical beasts guarding unknown shores. This unit is about the development of maps from ancient times through the 18th century. So let's get started with where we left off at the end of Unit 3, Chapter 9. Maps after 1507. From Waldseemüller to Mercatorand, the path toward precision. After Waldseemüller's daring map of 1507, cartographers across Europe saw the world with widened eyes. Renaissance maps showcased elaborate borders with mythological creatures, allegorical portraits of continents, Europa, Asia, Africa, and America personified as women, and cartouches framing map titles in ornate. The tension between function and beauty persisted. For many patrons, maps were as much wall as navigational tools. By the 18th century, globes were common in classrooms and noble estates. Pocket maps allowed travelers to carry foldable geography. Map publishers like Blauw in Amsterdam developed catalogs and subscriptions. The map was no longer rare. It became personal. Each voyage, whether by Magellan, Cabot, or Da Gama, added new coastlines, islands, and ocean routes. Maps of the 17th and 18th centuries took on political significance. Our story begins around 2.5 million years ago in Africa, the cradle of humanity. Or click here to return to the course homepage. Hominins, the group that includes all of our extinct ancestors and modern humans, emerged here and began exploring their... One of these hominins, Australopithecus, which includes the famous Lucy fossil, walked upright but still resembled apes more than us. They mostly stayed in eastern Africa, sticking close to the forest-savanna boundary where trees offered safety and food. But around 2 million years ago, something changed. Perhaps driven by a desire for new resources or escaping predators, our ancestors ventured out. They spread along the equator, following the lush green band where plants grew abundantly and animals roamed. They ventured into the north and south, pushing into Arabia, Europe, and East Asia. This pattern of movement would influence human migration for thousands of years. Following the resources, they asserted territorial claims during colonial expansion, visualized trade routes and resource flows, and served propaganda purposes, glorifying empires and explorers. Triangulation techniques improved land surveys, astronomy and timekeeping refined location measurements. Longitude was finally cracked with John Harrison's marine chronometer in the 18th century. Accuracy and maps reflected not just coastlines, but elevation, climate zones, population centers, and infrastructure. As the unit opens, it ends with America becoming America. Over time, the label America spread northward. While Vespucci explored South America, cartographers retroactively applied the name to the continent above. By the 18th century, North America and South America became standard. School atlases worldwide echoed Waldseemüller's early naming decision. The name became embedded in identity, national, continental, and cultural. The Americas, once speculative, now brimmed with cities, trade ports, and agricultural zones. Indigenous names were replaced, landscapes were renamed. Cartography became a tool of empire as well as education. What had been speculative ink became navigable reality. We'll start with Section 1. A new generation of mapmakers. Printing technology improved, and so did the craft. Copperplate engraving replaced woodcuts, allowing finer detail and greater durability. Colors appeared more regularly, with coastlines inked in blue, deserts in ochre, and mountains in slate grey. Maps moved from parchment scrolls to books, atlases, and educational manuals. Our next section is the rise of Gerardus Born in 1512 in Flanders, Gerardus Mercator became the towering cartographic figure of the 16th century. His achievements included the first use of the word atlas for a collection of maps and the creation of the Mercator projection in 1569. Designed for nautical accuracy, it straightened curved lines into usable routes. Sailors could chart courses with confidence, while the projection exaggerated polar regions, making Greenland appear larger than Africa. Its functionality made it indispensable. Mercator didn't challenge Waldseemüller's concept of America. He mainstreamed it by placing both North and South America prominently and proportionally on his maps. He validated their global significance. Moving on to Section 2. Ortelius and the birth of the Atlas. In 1570, Abraham Ortelius, a Dutch cartographer, published Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, the first modern atlas. It featured 53 uniform maps, explanatory notes, and a global scope that defined cartography for the next century. Ortelius emphasized consistency across maps, historical and cultural context in annotations, and collaboration with scholars and merchants across Europe. His work set the standard for mapmaking during the Age of Exploration. Ortelius' maps made geography accessible not just for nobles and scholars, but for literate citizens eager to understand the expanding world. Next, we have decorative Renaissance maps. Though accuracy improved, artistry didn't fade. Let's continue on to Section 4. From mapping to meaning. Now we come to Section 5. Globes, pocket maps, and mass reproduction. In our sixth and final section, the road toward scientific mapping. The Enlightenment brought scientific rigor. So, what do you think? Did you find this unit informative? Which section was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. Unit 4, Episode 1, Patterns of Early Human Migration. Let's start our journey through human prehistory by tracking our ancestors' travels. Where did they come from? Where did they go? And why did they move? For our next episode, click here to learn about the cognitive revolution. In 1507, an unknown German cartographer created the first map to bear the name America. 5 centuries later, the map vanished without a trace. It would be almost exactly 400 years before the world saw it again. But when it did reappear, it was greeted like the return of a hero. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this house. Today we are exploring the story of one of the most significant maps ever printed, the rediscovery of which shook the academic world and inspired generations of explorers, dreamers, and scholars. No, they were meant to accompany students enrolled in the prestigious University of Ingolstadt. The very Reverend John You see, this map was not intended to be a standalone product, but rather an oversized illustration in a textbook. That is, until 1901. Imagine yourself in the shoes of historian Joseph Fisher, a bold depiction of South America as a distinct landmass, a physical artifact of a geographic revolution. Over the next few years, experts would authenticate its origins. Analysis of the woodcut technique confirmed early 16th century methods. The Latin phrasing matched Ringmann's cosmographia. Ink, paper, and watermark tests supported its age and authorship. Scholars, historians, geographers, and explorers, everyone who had ever dreamed of far-off lands or charted their own course through life, felt a sense of wonder and excitement. There was something deeper at play as well. This map was more than just a historical artifact. For nearly 500 years, this map had been lost, destroyed, or discarded, but it had survived, and in doing so, had provided an invaluable window into the past. It was a lesson in humility and a call to action for all of us who are entrusted with the responsibility of preserving our shared history. It is used to teach students about cartography, history, and politics, and to foster critical thinking and global awareness. Its influence can be seen in everything from textbooks to museum exhibits to classroom lessons. It was a symbol of the human spirit of adventure and exploration. The map is on display at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., where it is housed in a secure chamber alongside the Declaration of Independence. Visitors from around the world come to marvel at its beauty and significance, while scholars use it to unlock new insights into the past. Scholars raced to uncover new insights about Waldseemüller and his map, eager to learn more about the man who had played such a pivotal role in shaping our understanding of the world. For some, it was a deeply personal moment, a connection to history and the past. For others, it was a source of national pride, a tangible link to their country's rich heritage. But for all of us, it was a reminder of the power of discovery and the importance of preserving our cultural heritage for future generations. Exhibitions featuring the map were held in museums and libraries around the world, drawing crowds of eager visitors who came to marvel at its beauty and significance. It is a reflection of the human spirit of exploration and discovery. It is a reminder of the fragility of knowledge and the importance of preserving our cultural heritage. And it is a testament to the enduring power of maps to shape our understanding of the world and ourselves. It represented the insatiable curiosity that drives us to explore the unknown and push the boundaries of what we know. For centuries, explorers had followed the paths laid out on this map, venturing into uncharted waters and discovering new lands and cultures. It was a legacy that had shaped the world as we know it today. It was as though a piece of history itself had come alive before their eyes. Every piece of evidence pointed to one conclusion. This was indeed the long-lost map. It was as though the spirit of exploration itself had materialized before his eyes. The map was a powerful symbol of the age of discovery, but it was also a reminder of the darker side of exploration, the conquest and colonization of new lands, and the displacement and oppression of indigenous peoples. As we celebrate the achievements of explorers like Waldseemüller, we must also acknowledge the impact of their discoveries on the course of human history. Meticulously crafted, exquisitely detailed, it depicted not just lands, but possibilities, a testament to human curiosity and the uncharted territories of the New World. The map became known as the birth certificate of America, a moniker that highlights its central role in the historical narrative. It was the first official document to use the term America, predating Columbus's voyage by 4 years and the official discovery of the continent by 2 decades. He quickly presented his find to academic institutions across Europe, igniting a firestorm of excitement among scholars. Its rediscovery was a moment of collective awe and inspiration, a tribute to the enduring human spirit of exploration and discovery. It was a moment that transcended the academic world and captured the attention of the entire globe. You are meticulously combing through documents in the library of Prince von Waldberg, hoping to shed light on the region's medieval past. Then suddenly, hidden between a medieval manuscript and a Renaissance book, you find something extraordinary. A complete copy of Waldseemüller Essay Original Universalis Cosmographia, 12 sheets intact, cleanly preserved, bound within a folio. To say this discovery was electrifying is a vast understatement. It was an atlas designed for classroom instruction, and its small print run reflected that purpose. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode. It seemed to have vanished into thin air. Scholars knew of its existence through bibliographies and references, but no confirmed copies could be found. So how did a broadside so important to history disappear in the first place? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to its creation. Chapter 10. Rediscovery in the 20th century. 4 centuries, the map slept in the shadows of history. When Waldseemüller published his Universalis Cosmographia in 1507, he only printed 500 copies, if that, and those 500 copies were not destined to travel the globe. But then tragedy struck. Religious upheaval and unrest swept through Europe, and English thought was caught in the crossfire. While the records are unclear on the specifics, we do know that the abbey where Waldseemüller worked was dissolved and stripped of its possessions. Sometime during this chaos, the map disappeared. Was it destroyed in the upheaval? Lost in the fires of war? Buried in archives? Mislabeled or misunderstood? Speculation brewed. Some believed the entire print run had been lost. Others held out hope for forgotten libraries or private collections. Whatever the truth, the map went missing and would remain missing for over 400 years. During that time, it turned up occasionally in reference books and historical annales. Here was the very map that had launched the New World onto the stage of history. Here was the first map to name America. Could this really be the lost Waldseemüller? And what a map it was! On this map, the Americas were there before they were known. A cartographic marvel that captured imagination and fueled the ambitions of explorers for generations to come. As news of the find spread, the world took notice. But it wasn't just the thrill of discovery that captivated people's imaginations, but perhaps most importantly, the map served as a reminder of the fragility of knowledge and the importance of preserving our cultural heritage. The rediscovery of the map prompted renewed efforts to explore and understand the history of exploration. And yet, for all the excitement and wonder that surrounded the map, there was also a sense of unease. In the years since its rediscovery, the map has become an important teaching tool in classrooms around the world. And now you have a chance to experience it for yourself. It's hard to overstate the emotional impact of the map's rediscovery. In the end, the story of the map is more than just a tale of discovery or a celebration of cartography. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave us a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. See you next time. From settling feuds between kings and queens to helping you find your way home, maps have long been essential to understanding our world. But when you look closely at those well-traveled paths, you might notice something strange. There was no king or queen who declared it, or any global governing body that ratified it. It quietly appeared on one man's map and in an obscure 9-page Latin booklet seen by few, and yet that small act of naming, rooted in interpretation, planted a seed that would grow into global awareness. America wasn't merely a place on a map. It represented a chance for exploration, conquest, trade, or settlement. Spain, England, and France, the colonial powers with territories in the Americas, used the names in legal documents, proclamations and treaties, further embedding them in the global consciousness. Meanwhile, the name appeared in trade logs, migration papers, military campaigns, and other records of human activity, signifying the vast impact of this new world on daily life. More than just a poetic choice, it was a deliberate political statement. The term suggested unity across former British territories and embraced the continental scope of their ambitions, not just the Atlantic coastline. Writers like Walt Whitman celebrated America as a democratic muse in Leaves of Grass. Regionalist painters depicted it as a bucolic landscape and source of identity in their artwork. Hollywood made it synonymous with storytelling and the movies. Jazz musicians found inspiration in its rhythms, and blues singers gave voice to its struggles. Over time, people started sharing tales of how the great explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, inspired by a mythical island, had set sail and stumbled upon a vast unknown land. The tales of Vespucci and Waldseemüller became part of the origin story of the New World, a story that highlighted exploration, curiosity, and the human drive to understand the globe. As people re-examine the history of exploration, they've started to challenge the hero worship of figures like Vespucci and Columbus, acknowledging the darker aspects of these voyages, including the impact on indigenous populations. Some now prefer to highlight the contributions of indigenous peoples and the complexities of the age of exploration, and these stories continue to be told today, often in school textbooks and community gatherings, serving as a reminder of the rich history behind the name. They wove stories of daring voyages, uncharted waters, and the thrill of discovery, adding layers of adventure and romance to the name's origins. Many indigenous groups who have long been marginalized are now challenging the colonial labels that European explorers left behind. It's a term used in political speeches, diplomatic treaties, branding, advertising, and everyday conversation. It's synonymous with freedom, opportunity, and innovation, but also complexity, contradiction, and diversity. And all of it started with a mapmaker and a Latin translator in a quiet mountain town centuries ago. They're encouraging students to consider whose stories have been traditionally highlighted and why, and to explore the richness and diversity of the Americas beyond the familiar narratives. As the Americas continue to evolve, so too will the name America and the stories that surround it. Its meaning will continue to be debated, redefined, and reinterpreted by each generation, reflecting the dynamism of the region and its people. Some use the name itself as a canvas, deconstructing and recontextualizing it in installations, performances, and digital art. Others draw inspiration from indigenous designs and symbols, weaving them into contemporary pieces that celebrate cultural heritage. Instead, they're reclaiming their native names for lands and places, reconnecting with their cultural heritage and asserting their identity. These narratives, passed down through generations, became deeply ingrained in the cultural consciousness. Rock bands amplified its rebellious spirit, and hip-hop artists sampled its urban sounds. Each representation added layers to the names, meaning sometimes celebratory, sometimes critical, but always complex. America came to house contradiction and carry multiple meanings simultaneously. Furthermore, it echoed Enlightenment ideals of universalism and new beginnings, aligning the fledgling nation with broader intellectual currents that celebrated progress and human potential. However, in common speech, especially in English, it often denotes, specifically, the United States. This linguistic tension has sparked dialogue and debate, particularly around how the name overshadows the identities of Latin American nations. Scholars point out that Waldseemüller originally labeled only South America, and that the inclusion of North America came later. Cultural theorists explore how the very act of naming can shape power and perception. Meanwhile, activists advocate for recognizing the distinct American identities of their countries. Rich in their own histories, cultures, and contributions, it signified a break from the old world, a clean slate where fortunes could be made and dreams realized. Still, once it caught on, it stuck. And as the Americas grew and changed over the centuries, the name evolved with them, taking on new meanings and associations. The idea of an expansive and transformative America continued into the 20th century, symbolized by the iconic image of the American dream. This concept suggests that no matter where they came from, immigrants and their children could rise to wealth and prosperity within the United States. For many, it came to symbolize a journey toward a better life, a feeling that resonated deeply, especially for those seeking new beginnings. They're almost always labeled with names, and those names, while seemingly mundane, are actually powerful tools that can shape how we understand our planet. First, America got some press. Waldseemüller's map and writings circulated among scholars and cartographers. All the while, people weren't just getting acquainted with the word America, they were also embracing its meaning. As the name circulated, it took on a life of its own, becoming a psychological label as much as a geographic one. And what did it signify? Newness, opportunity, and transformation. Then they repeated the name. First hesitantly, then increasingly confidently on their own maps and in their own publications. Then school books taught it, textbooks that trained the next generation of geographers and explorers. Then citizens adopted it, using it in conversation, writing, and even petitions to their leaders. Then governments inscribed it on official documents and in public spaces, making it a part of daily life. So join us as we explore one word that helped shape geography, culture, politics, and even imagination: America. When German cartographer Martin Waldseemüller labeled the newly discovered continent America in his 1507 world map, he was putting forward a scholarly proposal, not a royal decree. Over the next century, America went from being an obscure geographic label to becoming a widely recognized part of everyday speech. Here's how it happened. In this way, the name spread slowly but surely through established networks and institutions until it became familiar. After all, it was associated with a recently discovered land that seemed brimming with potential. By the 18th century, the name had solidified. North America and South America were common terms used by cartographers, merchants, explorers, and statesmen alike. The adoption was hardly uniform or forced, but rather an organic process that emerged from years of repeated usage. In 1776, when 13 of the 17 colonies along the Atlantic coast declared independence from Britain and formed the United States of America, they solidified the name's political meaning. As the United States grew westward across the North American continent, the name America became synonymous with manifest destiny, the belief that it was ordained by God for the United States to expand across the entire continent. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, America showed up in everything from literature to art, cinema, and music, reflecting how deeply ingrained the name was in the cultural consciousness. Meanwhile, globally, the name America generally refers broadly to the continents. In essence, Naming is rarely neutral. It carries weight, and the name America is perhaps one of the most potent examples of this. Yet the story of the name doesn't end there. Even as it became widespread, the story of how America got its name survived in local legends and geographical lore. In the 20th century, these stories took on new life as educators incorporated them into their lessons about the Americas. However, these traditional narratives have also come under scrutiny. Nevertheless, the tale of how America got its name remains a popular part of the cultural fabric, though it may be changing as each generation retells it. In the 21st century, the Americas are home to a multitude of voices and perspectives, and with them, calls for greater representation and inclusion. Educators are also playing a role in this shift by teaching the map's origin story, acknowledging Vespucci and Waldseemüller, but also incorporating the stories of indigenous peoples and other explorers. Artists, too, are joining this conversation. They're reinterpreting America in their work, challenging stereotypes and offering new perspectives. These artistic expressions are sparking dialogue and encouraging empathy, contributing to a broader cultural shift toward greater understanding and today, the name America holds a prominent place in our collective consciousness. The story of the name serves as a reminder of how language shapes our perception of the world, and how a single word can encapsulate profound meaning and historical weight. Chapter 12, Modern Reflections, Waldseemüller's enduring influence on cartography, identity and consciousness. We've journeyed back to 1507, explored the life and times of its most famous map, and considered its reception in the early modern period. Now let's turn forward again to our own time. You might be wondering, what does this ancient map still have to teach us? Does it have anything to say to modern audiences who have access to GPS and Google Earth? Our answer is a resounding yes. In this chapter, we'll examine how the Universalist cosmographia continues to resonate in different ways today, offering insights into everything from education to ethics, popular culture and psychology. For instance, students and scholars alike are challenged to consider the implications of the fact that a European explorer named a newly discovered continent after himself, rather than acknowledging or learning about the diverse cultures and languages of the peoples who had lived there for thousands of years. Institutions like the Library of Congress, British Museum and Smithsonian all have digital replicas of the map online, allowing people around the world to scroll, swipe, and study it from the comfort of home. They remain attentive to the ways in which its production and reception were deeply implicated in processes of cultural domination and control. But these critiques do not aim to discredit the map's historical value. Rather, they seek to recover a more complex and nuanced understanding of early modern cartography and its place in the history of colonialism and empire. All of this work highlights the importance of considering the context in which the map was produced and received in order to understand its full meaning and significance. They've called for greater attention to be paid to the histories and experiences of non-European peoples and cultures, as well as to the ways in which those histories have been erased or distorted by colonial narratives. Some scholars have even called for the removal of Eurocentric maps, like the 1507 Universalist Cosmographia, from classrooms altogether, arguing that they perpetuate harmful stereotypes and reinforce systems of oppression. Many have been inspired by its depiction of the world to explore questions about how humans create mental maps of the world around them, and how those maps shape our sense of identity and belonging. Some have examined the ways in which memories and emotions shape our understanding of space, while others have explored how our beliefs about the world shape our behavior and decisions. When it first appeared, it was an outlier, but over time, it helped set the standard for how we represent the world. 5 centuries later, its contrarian spirit lives on, inspiring new ways of understanding how maps work and what they can accomplish, it's no surprise that it continues to capture the imagination of educators, artists, and activists who seek to push the boundaries of what maps can do. Ultimately, these critiques challenge us to confront the ways in which maps and other forms of spatial representation shape our understanding of identity, culture, and power. Perhaps the 1507 Universalist Cosmographia will continue to evolve, shedding new light on the human story as long as there are those eager to read it. Whether we're talking about the influence of dominant narratives, the importance of centering marginalized voices, or the psychological dimensions of belief. If you've enjoyed this series, please show your support and stay tuned for more updates. Until next time, happy mapping and perception. This remarkable map continues to offer us valuable insights into the human condition. It challenges us to confront the biases and blind spots of our own thinking and to recognize the richness and complexity of the world around us. As we continue to grapple with these challenges, we can be inspired by the curiosity and daring of those who first charted the course towards a more inclusive and enlightened understanding of our place in the universe. Some activists have created their own maps that center the experiences of indigenous peoples and highlight the diversity of their cultures and languages. Others have used art and performance to challenge the ways in which maps and other forms of spatial representation have been used to justify colonization and dispossession. The 1507 Universalist therefore continues to resonate in important ways in contemporary discussions surrounding decolonization and it serves as a reminder of the historical roots of the colonial worldview and the urgent need to center the voices and experiences of those who have been marginalized by it. They remind us that maps are not simply neutral tools for representing the world, but rather powerful tools for constructing particular narratives about the world and our place in it. So while the map may not be as unproblematic as some have claimed, it remains an invaluable resource for understanding the history of cartography, the age of exploration, and the emergence of modern conceptions of identity and culture. Its continued presence in classrooms and museums is a testament to its enduring relevance and the richness and complexity of its historical legacy. Through close readings of the maps, borders, annotations, and illustrations, they've uncovered evidence of emerging colonial attitudes toward non-Europeans and non-Christian peoples, drawing inspiration from Edward Said's concept of Orientalism. Some scholars have analyzed how the map naturalizes European perspectives by presenting them as universal. They argue that by positioning Europe at the center of the map and depicting the rest of the world as exotic and backward, the map reinforces a Eurocentric worldview that has had a profound impact on global politics and culture. Other scholars have examined the ways in which the map erases indigenous geographies and histories. By failing to acknowledge the existence of known European peoples and cultures, by depicting the Americas as terra nullius, or empty land, the map legitimizes the process of colonization and dispossession that followed shortly thereafter. Scholars have also examined the map's reception among early modern audiences, demonstrating that many of those who saw it did not accept its depiction of the Americas without question. Rather, they debated the map's claims, offering alternative accounts of the lands and peoples depicted. Additionally, the map invites examination of the ethics of representation. Given the multitude of diverse peoples whose geographies and identities were erased from view in order to produce this single image of the world, we'll begin by arguing that the map offers an invaluable lens for understanding how naming, imagining, and representing space affect our sense of identity and understanding of the world around us. If you've enjoyed learning about this incredible map with us, please show your support For example, many educators use the map to teach about the history of scientific thought and the age of discovery, as well as the development of cartography and the printing press. Others use it to teach about the nature of knowledge and belief and the relationship between map and territory. The map has also been used to teach about the history of identity politics, particularly as it pertains to the naming of the Americas, and because it was one of the earliest printed materials to feature the word America, it remains a touchstone for courses in media studies, allowing students to explore how early print shaped the public consciousness. The map is also sometimes used in art and design classes as an example of visual storytelling and iconography. Its rich illustrations and detailed borders provide ample opportunity for discussion and analysis. And finally, the map's unique status as both a historical artifact and a work of art makes it particularly suited for interdisciplinary classes that bring together perspectives from history, art, science, and literature. And with that said, let's get started. But then we'll go further, demonstrating how the map is increasingly being used to grapple with questions of power, authority, and the politics of knowledge. But before we dive into these reflections, we want to invite you to join us in celebrating a milestone. One way in which the 1507 Universalist cosmograph remains relevant today is through its enduring influence on teaching and learning across a range of disciplines. The map has also been used in philosophy and ethics classes to prompt discussions about topics such as naming, authority, and representation. Moreover, museums and other cultural institutions continue to recognize the value of this map and regularly exhibit it in shows that trace the history of cartography, unpack the age of exploration, or engage visitors in imagining how early modern explorers built their understanding of the world through paper and print. However, while scholars and educators once heralded the map as a triumph of Renaissance humanism and a symbol of European Enlightenment, contemporary scholars now tend to interrogate it more closely. Some scholars even argue that the map should not be read as a map at all, but instead as a work of art or propaganda. In recent decades, scholars in fields ranging from cultural studies to literary theory have drawn upon the map to explore the ways in which dominant narratives shape our understanding of the world. Through close readings of the maps, illustrations, and annotations, scholars have also explored the ways in which it naturalizes violence and subjugation by depicting non-European peoples as savage or uncivilized. In recent years, the map has become a touchstone for scholars working on decolonizing the curriculum and diversifying the histories that are taught in schools. Moving beyond the realm of academia, the map has also inspired activists and artists working to reclaim indigenous geographies and histories. Finally, we'd like to turn our attention to the ways in which modern thinkers have grappled with the psychological dimensions of the map. Ultimately, the 1507 Universalist cosmographia remains a powerful metaphor for the ways in which our understanding of the world is shaped by the stories we tell ourselves about it. It's hard to overstate the impact of this map. So what will the next 500 years bring? Thank you so much for joining us to explore the 1507 Universalist How do we read a map? Do we follow roads until we find the place we're looking for, or do we begin with the place itself? We could start with Columbus's grave in Seville, tracing his route across an ocean to where he died believing he was in India. When I say the word map, what do you see? They show you locations based on what you've searched for before. It can classify and analyze terrain, predict climate patterns, design models for disaster relief, and more. Artists and activists have long used maps to call attention to problems. Game designers sketch out continents, economies, and histories, while writers draft fantasy geographies that feel lived in, complete with their own languages and geologies. Educators even use maps to recreate ancient cities so students can explore them in virtual reality. Teachers can guide students to important sites or let them explore on their own. Imagine if you could visit ancient Rome like a time travel. That's what some classrooms are doing today. So maps no longer belong only to reality. They're part of imagination. They let us travel without moving. During the civil rights movement, activists passed out maps showing where whites could and couldn't eat, drink, and shop. But as maps become more powerful, questions do. 2. Who owns geographic data? How are borders drawn in digital spaces? And can maps mislead or reinforce bias? Today's cartographers, whether coders, artists, or activists, must carry that responsibility. The pen may no longer be literal, but its impact endures. Today, similar maps show where wealth is and isn't in a country or city, helping people see how money shapes our lives. There are hand-drawn treasure maps with secret coves and islands of gold, star charts filled with beasts from myth and legend, topographic prints meant to be hung like art. It's easy to think of maps as boring, technical things, but that wasn't true in 1507, and it's not true today. The maps in this story are just a small sample of the ones out there. There are protest songs set to maps, interactive timelines, and maps carved into giant wooden chests. Most importantly, maps invite us to do one thing. Imagine, whether it's Waldseemüller imagining a new world, game designers imagining magical lands, or you imagining your next adventure. Maps let us explore what if. They show us where we are and where we want to be. And maybe that's why we keep making them. Maybe it all began with that single word in the corner of a 500-year-old woodcut, America. It's a word that opens up a continent and a story that opens up a world. These maps capture the wonder of discovery without the cold precision of satellite imaging. They remind us that geography isn't just coordinates and capitals. It's curiosity. They visualize food deserts, places without access to healthy food and housing gaps, areas without enough homes. Other maps show how communities were torn apart during slavery and colonization, while others trace colonization routes around the world. Some even explore psychological spaces, like how cities feel rather than function. In this map, each color shows how residents feel about different parts of town. Blue means safe, and green means beautiful. But there's a lot of gray, showing places that don't feel good to be in. These maps aren't static, they're voices. They challenge us to rethink space, not as neutral ground, but as deeply personal. For example, scientists recently used to look at how migration and urbanization will change the world by 2050. The result is a simulated map that shows what the planet might look like decades from now. Cities will get bigger and more interconnected, but some places will shrink and farmland will expand. Other AI is bringing long-dead landscapes back to life. Rivers that no longer flow, coastlines that shifted hundreds of years ago, cities lost beneath the soil. Using a combination of historic maps and modern imaging techniques, some groups are reconstructing what these places looked like through code, imagining what they might sound like, smell like, even what plants might grow there. And none of this is science fiction. All these projects exist today, and they show how AI cartography isn't just about roads. It's about insight. It helps cities breathe smarter, farms grow cleaner, and people move safer. They're socialized. Users can leave reviews and tags, so anyone who follows their feed sees their favorite places. And they're real-time responsive. They adjust your route based on traffic, weather, or even emergencies. And behind these features are data streams. There's satellite feeds, crowdsourced updates from other users, governmental geolocation APIs, and more. All these different types of data come together to make a map that's always changing, and with that power comes an incredible amount of knowledge. Waldseemüller once guessed at coastlines from old Latin pamphlets. Today, machines scanned entire continents from satellites. They can see exactly where roads end and forests begin. With just a few clicks, we can hold entire countries in our hands, flipping through layers of data that reveal mountains, rivers, buildings, even shadows. People once spent years traveling to chart the unknown. Now we send machines into space to keep track of the world while we sleep. Maybe something like this: a paper rectangle covered in roads, rivers, and names. But maps don't live on paper anymore. Today, maps live everywhere. They live inside GPS systems, guiding millions of cars every day, inside smartphone apps showing traffic, weather, and which restaurants have the longest lines, inside augmented reality interfaces, which layer directional arrows over city streets, and inside drone and satellite imaging, updating once an hour or even minute by minute. Maps have traveled light years from their humble beginnings. They've gone from pieces of paper to being part of everyday life. Or we could start with that first American map, printed by an engraver named Matthias Ringman in 1507, before America was America. But we know it's here somewhere, because there's a man standing on the tip of this landmass, pulling back the curtain to reveal a new world. This is the very first map to name the Americas as America. Its creator, a German monk named Martin Waldseemüller, thought he was naming a mythical land from an ancient Hindu epic. He had no idea he was ushering in a new age of discovery and giving a name to a continent. 1507, when this map was made, is now called the year zero for the age of modern maps. Everything we know about mapping, from how we read a compass to how we choose our battles, it all traces back to this moment, and everything that came after. So here's a history of maps and everything that comes after. Part 1, from paper to the cloud. Part 2, the age of data-driven cartography. Modern maps are also personalized. Part 3, AI and cartographic consciousness. Today, artificial intelligence scans all those data layers and helps us do things that would take humans years. Part 4, maps as social commentary. But maps can do more than just show us where things are. They can show us where things aren't. Part 5, virtual worlds and spatial fiction. Today, entirely new worlds are built on maps. Part 6, cartography and ethics. Part 7, the return to wonder. But maybe the deepest maps are still the most poetic. Part 8, the legacy of 1507. Back to where we started. The very first map to name the Americas as America.